probably your first day of Sunday school. Or maybe your grandmother had it on a needlepoint sampler hanging up on the wall. You remember it. It says, "He who has the gold makes the rules." I'm sorry, that's the wrong one, isn't it? No, it's the one that says, "Do unto others before they do unto you." That's not it either. You know, though, we have these cynical versions that live in our heads, that frankly live in our culture even more than what Jesus taught. When he told his disciples, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." We don't honor that one so much. Do you notice that? And I think there's a good reason that we don't. It's hard. That's the excuse we use, isn't it? It's hard. We don't want to do hard things. We want everything to be nice and easy. But in Luke's gospel, as Jesus talked to his followers, he gave them a difficult gospel. A gospel that was much more at home in the first century among a bunch of peasants who were a ragtag bunch of followers of Jesus than it would ever be at home in the power of empire once Constantine got a hold of it. That message, do to others as you would have them do to you. It doesn't seem like it works so very well when we try and put together governments and policies. If we follow the golden rule, we'd all sit around holding hands, maybe singing campfire songs. But there's something that holds us back from that. We can't, or more likely, we just won't follow the golden rule. Maybe we do when we're with our families or with people that we already know and love, but let's turn our eyes to people who are different from us, and it seems to fall apart. If we followed the golden rule as a people, we would imagine ourselves as people fleeing violence. And we would want to welcome folks into a new homeland where they could be safe. Instead, we talk of building walls. We deny immigrants their basic human rights. We separate children from their families. If we followed the golden rule, we would imagine ourselves as people whose full-time jobs couldn't earn enough to pay the rent and put food on the table and cover our medical expenses. And in that imagining, we would adjust our economic policies so that full-time work would ensure a living wage, and where health care would be understood as a fundamental human right. Instead, we insist on a different way. We resist raising the minimum wage, we cut Medicaid funding, and we give tax cuts to the rich. If we followed the golden rule, we would imagine ourselves as people whose race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or gender identity have been weaponized against us. And we would work to build a more just and equitable society, where everyone is valued for who they are and is afforded equal opportunity and dignity. Instead, we find U.S. citizens detained by an ICE agent in Montana because he overheard them speaking Spanish in a checkout line. We find transgender members of the military being forced out of the ranks. we find incarceration rates for blacks and Hispanics that are vastly higher than for whites. If we followed the golden rule, we would imagine ourselves as employees of the Pratt Company in Aurora, Illinois, or as students at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, or as dancers in a nightclub in Thousand Oaks, California. And we would work to put an end to our nation's plague of mass shootings. Instead, we cling to the shall not be infringed part of the Second Amendment and completely ignore the well-regulated militia part. If we followed the golden rule, we wouldn't find our Catholic siblings meeting to discuss what generations of abuse by priests has done to children, and how covering up of those scandals has just perpetrated and perpetuated the injustice and evil. If we followed the golden rule, we wouldn't find our Methodist friends gathering this very weekend to talk about dissolving the denomination because at least half of them can't figure out how to live in the 21st century with LGBT folks as full participants in the reign of God and in the Church of Jesus Christ. Now, as a nation, as churches even, we fail to follow Christ's teaching. I won't even launch into how as individuals we fail. How we hold grudges and resentments that are toxic to that person who sits at the next desk over in our office. To that person who challenges our sense of position and authority. To those people who worry us and make us nervous. Now, if we follow the golden rule, if we follow the teaching of Jesus Christ, the world will be a very different place. Jesus taught us to love our enemies. I swear sometimes we have difficulty even loving our friends. Jesus taught us, do good to those who hate you. How often do we muddle through our days doing good to nobody, much less those who hate us? Jesus tells us, pray for those who abuse you. And he's not talking prayers for a heart attack. Pray for those who abuse you. He tells us, if anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. Do I even need to say anything about that? From anyone who takes your coat, don't withhold your shirt. Yes, give them the shirt off your back, Jesus tells us. Yet we cling to what we perceive to be ours. Give to everyone who begs from you. We're not so good at that either, are we? If anyone takes away your goods, don't ask for them back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. It's hard. It's not what we want to do. But maybe that's why Jesus felt he needed to tell us this. If following our normal human nature were enough, Jesus wouldn't have had to say a word. But he tells us instead that we're called to step out of our comfort zone in faith, that we're called to live as people of reconciliation, as builders of bridges, as people who can stand up to injustice and name it and change it. Because we realize that those who perpetrate injustice are also children of God. That's partially what Dr. Martin Luther King taught us when he said that violence can never drive out violence. Only love can do that. It's a good thing that we have stories of faithful people who resist evil with love. People that we can look back on from just a generation or so ago, but also those faith stories that resonate from Scripture. This morning we heard just a snippet of the story of Joseph. You remember Joseph, not Jesus' dad, but the other Joseph, the other dreamer, the one that Andrew Lloyd Webber called in his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat story, the one who showed us the power of dreaming, telling us of Joseph's coat with golden lining, bright colors shining, wonderful and new. And in the east the dawn was breaking, and the world waking. Any dream will do. Any dream. But I wonder if that's true. Some dreams are better than others. Some dreams call us to move beyond ourselves. Others just reinforce what we've always thought. Joseph's story. When he had those dreams of the stars and the wheat sheaves bowing down. Self-aggrandizing dreams. Dreams that he was happy to tell his brothers all about, because it lifted him up and put them down. You know those dreams? You remember the story of how Joseph, who was Jacob's favorite son, had these dreams. And he told his brothers about them until they had had it up to here, and then some. Until the day they finally set out to kill him, but instead only sold him into slavery. Smearing that Technicolor coat with blood and telling their dad of how a lion had killed him. They were done. Those dreams were no longer relevant to their lives. Joseph sold into slavery to a bunch of hairy Ishmaelites. But that's not where the story ends. Joseph makes his way into Egypt. He is sold to Potiphar. He's thrown in prison. He gets the ear of Pharaoh and interprets Pharaoh's dreams. How he's rewarded with his position as chancellor, as the one who oversees Egypt's agriculture, who prepares during the 7 years of blessing and plenty for the 7 years of famine to come. The story brings Joseph's brothers to Egypt, fleeing the famine in Canaan. And that's where they encounter Joseph. That's where we find today's reading picking up. With Joseph, the one who'd been betrayed by his brothers, the one who'd been sold into slavery, the one who'd been murdered in spirit, looking at those who had done that to him. I don't know about you. I'm not sure I would be as big a person as Joseph. I'm not sure I would be able to say to my 11 brothers, you know, it's okay. Because what you intended for evil, God intended for good. I'd like to believe I could, but I don't know if I'm a big enough person. But that's the story of Joseph, who addresses his brothers with words of forgiveness, who feeds them, who plants kisses on them, who sends for his father. Bring him here, and we'll set up a home for you in Egypt, where you can be safe, where you can be well fed, where you can put down roots for a while. And so it was. The one who had been a bit of a jerk to his brothers, who had experienced the jerkiness of his brothers right back, realized it was time to set that aside. That it was time to rebuild relationships. To love those, even within his own family, who have become enemies. When you look at your family, you probably have somebody that you need to make up to. When you look at your place of business, you probably have somebody with a relationship challenge that you need to fix. When we look at our nation, we sure as heck have things we need to fix. Broken relationships in places where our policies are anything but love. There may not be much you can do, but there may be everything you can do. A little change, a little love, a little transformation that remakes the world just a little bit. So let's return to the beginning. The light is dimming, and the dream is too. The world and I, we are still waiting and hesitating. Any dream will do. May we not hesitate. May we not let the lights dim. May we not be people who hear a story, let it wash over us, and then go out into the world unchanged. May we instead be people of love, of compassion, who live out the teachings of Christ even though they are hard. And as we face that challenge, may we be blessed. Amen.